The docking bay of Outpost Helion 3 hummed with metallic echoes as the Ralthar Dominion's elite exploration squad gathered in formation. The air smelled faintly of coolant and dust, vibrating with the low murmur of generators powering the transport shuttle for the day's assignment. Captain Craval stood at the front, his tall, armored frame casting an elongated shadow across the polished floor. His skin, a deep obsidian blue under the harsh white lighting, gleamed with a natural sheen that emphasized the sculpted ridges of muscle along his shoulders. His squad respected him for his strength, his authority, and his flawless record. He had faced scorch storms, spine beasts, and radiation blizzards, yet never once had he shown the faintest sign of weakness. Today, however, something, or rather someone, was testing his patience before the mission even began. A new temporary squad member was assigned to accompany them, and as the mechanical doors slid open with a loud hiss, the entire formation turned to look at the newcomer. Mason Ward stepped into the hangar with an easy stride, dressed in a simple human survival uniform without the usual assortment of heavy biological armor that Dominion soldiers preferred. His brown hair was tied back, his posture relaxed, and his expression open and unbothered, as if he had just strolled in from a casual morning jog rather than a military deployment. Craval blinked slowly, baffled by the sight of a human cadet walking with such confidence toward one of the most physically demanding squads in the Dominion. Mason lifted his hand in a friendly wave. "Morning, everyone. Sorry if I'm a bit early. I wasn't sure how fast the shuttles run around here." The aliens exchanged uneasy glances. Some shifted in their armor, others whispered behind their masks. The human was small compared to the towering Ralthar soldiers, at least 2 heads shorter than the captain and easily half his weight. His exposed forearms showed lean muscles, defined but nowhere near the bulging layers of reinforced tissue that Dominion physiology produced. Craval narrowed his dark eyes and stepped forward, his boots thudding heavily on the floor with each measured stride. "So this is the replacement the Command Council sent?" Craval's voice rumbled like stone grinding against stone. "A human? With those tiny arms?" His gaze traveled critically over Mason's physique, stopping at the man's biceps, which tightened slightly as he adjusted the strap on his small pack. "Is this a joke, Cadet? Are you lost? The cooking staff is 2 levels up." A wave of nervous laughter spread through the squad, some masking their uncertainty with amusement. Mason, however, didn't flinch. He simply smiled, the kind of light, casual smile that suggested he had heard similar remarks countless times and long ago decided not to take offense. He planted his feet firmly, folded his arms loosely across his chest, and tilted his head curiously. "Nope, I'm in the right place," he said cheerfully. "Human Cadet Mason Ward, reporting for duty. I was told I'd be joining your squad for the Veraxis 5 march and supply transport exercise. Looking forward to it, actually." Craval let out a low, disdainful scoff. "Looking forward to collapsing, perhaps." He leaned down until his sharp features were level with Mason's eyes. "My squad performs missions on worlds where gravity shifts mid-step and predators track movement through soundless vibrations. Every soldier here has trained since childhood to handle extreme terrain. Yet Command expects me to believe that a human, an Earth-born soft skin, will keep up?" Mason didn't blink. Instead, he shrugged with an easygoing confidence. "I walk pretty fast. And I lift a decent amount, too. I think it'll be fine." "Fine?" Craval repeated, incredulous. "Your kind has no external armor, no internal cooling membranes, no reinforced bone ridges, and no combat glands. How do you intend to last even 1 hour?" "Same way I always do," Mason replied, tightening the strap of his small pack. "With legs and lungs. Works pretty well so far." The squad stared. None understood how a human could remain so casual in the face of the captain's intimidation. Craval straightened, towering once again over everyone, and crossed his massive arms. He looked at his soldiers, silently inviting them to share in the ridicule. "Look at him," Craval said loudly, gesturing to Mason as if presenting a fragile toy. Look at those soft human muscles. I have seen heavier vines on Veraxis trees. How is this creature supposed to carry emergency gear? How is he supposed to navigate terrain that breaks even trained Dominion recruits? Mason raised a hand slightly. I mean, I'm right here. You can just ask me. The remark earned him a few quiet snickers from the younger cadets, but Craval was unfazed. He stepped forward until he was close enough to cast a shadow directly over Mason's boots. You are not here to speak unless spoken to, the captain declared with a voice that echoed through the hangar. You are here to observe your own limitations. If you falter, I will not carry you. If you collapse, I will not wait. If you fall behind, I will leave you. Understood? Mason nodded calmly. Understood, but I don't plan on falling behind. Something in the human's tone, quiet but certain, caused a faint ripple of confusion across the squad. It was not arrogance. It was not bravado. It was something else, something steadier, something that didn't fit the captain's assumptions. Craval's eyes hardened, refusing to acknowledge even the possibility of being challenged. We shall see, the captain muttered. Gear up. The march begins in 20 minutes. As the squad dispersed to collect their heavy-duty supply packs, each one designed for the massive strength of Dominion anatomy, Mason walked behind them with a relaxed pace. While the others tightened straps, secured armor plates, and activated biological sensors along their exosuits, he ran a simple check of his water supply and fixed a loose clasp on his pack. He moved with the ease of someone who had done this 1,000 times, yet nothing about him appeared exceptional to the aliens watching him. Two cadets whispered to each other, glancing at his small frame. Another cadet nudged his friend, pointing at Mason's thin wrists and lightly built shoulders. The captain caught these reactions and smirked, confident that the human would validate all his assumptions. Yet Mason stood there, utterly unbothered, humming an earth tune under his breath while the giant Dominion soldiers prepared like armored titans around him. His calmness irritated Craval more than his presence. As the squad lined up once more, Craval stepped forward with a final, dismissive look at the human. Stay close, he said stiffly. You will not last long enough to matter, but I prefer to witness the moment your human endurance reaches its limit. Mason gave a quick thumbs up. Sure thing, Captain. The squad erupted in confused murmurs. No one, absolutely no one, had ever given a thumbs up to Captain Craval. Craval turned sharply and signaled the march. The squad moved toward the shuttle with heavy, synchronized steps, metal clanking, armor rattling, sensors chirping. In the middle of that intimidating procession walked Mason Ward, with no armor, no biological enhancements, and no visible worry, ready to enter one of the toughest missions in Dominion training. And despite the mocking comments, despite the dismissive looks, despite the captain's cold hostility, a faint spark of curiosity flickered behind more than one pair of alien eyes. Because if the human really was as fragile as he looked, why did he look completely unafraid? The shuttle vibrated as its engines powered down on the landing pad of Veraxis 5, releasing a wave of humid jungle air through the open hatch. A thick green scent seeped inside, the unmistakable smell of a world where vegetation grew faster than light reached the ground. The canopy outside swayed in heavy layers, turning sunlight into scattered emerald beams that flickered across the metal floor. The moment the ramp lowered, the squad stepped out with disciplined precision, boots sinking slightly into the soft earth as alien insects buzzed somewhere deep within the undergrowth. Captain Craval marched to the supply crates that had been dropped earlier by transport drones. Each crate was large, reinforced with Dominion alloy, and sealed with biometric locks. As the captain placed his palm on the scanner, the crate opened with a metallic hiss, revealing rows of massive survival packs designed for multi-species squads. Each pack weighed roughly 50 kilograms, loaded with rations, portable shield emitters, medical kits, hydration tanks, collapsible shelters, and weapon cores. The packs were bulky, thick as boulders, and shaped to fit the broad-backed anatomy of Dominion soldiers. Craval lifted the first one effortlessly and swung it over his shoulder, the straps expanding to accommodate his frame. One by one, the cadets stepped forward to collect their gear. Most hoisted the packs with controlled strain. A few groaned but managed. Mason, standing near the back of the formation, observed quietly as he scanned the tree line and listened to the rhythmic clicking of distant predators. The human's eyes darted between the officers and the environment, taking in every sound, every shift in the wind, every faint tremor beneath his boots. He seemed at ease, almost cheerful, despite being the smallest among giants. When Craval finally turned toward him, the captain raised an eyebrow. "Human," he said sharply, "your pack is at the end of the row. Try not to hurt yourself lifting it." Mason nodded casually and stepped around the others, but he didn't pick up his pack immediately. Instead, he paused, noticing two alien cadets struggling. One cadet bent his knees repeatedly, trying to leverage his pack onto his back, but the shifting weight caused him to lose balance each time. Another cadet attempted to drag her pack closer to a flat surface, but slid only a few centimeters before collapsing onto one knee, gasping under the heat-heavy air. Mason walked past his own pack and stopped in front of the struggling pair. "Need a hand?" he asked with a friendly smile. Neither cadet answered. Both simply stared at him, unsure if he was joking or insulting them. Without waiting for permission, Mason crouched beside the first cadet, grabbed the pack with both hands, and lifted it with a single smooth motion. The cadet's eyes widened as the human rested the entire weight across his forearms. "Where do you want it?" Mason asked. "Instructor, Captain, on my back," the cadet stammered, too shocked to form a coherent sentence. Mason helped him adjust the straps, secured the fasteners, and gave the side buckle a firm tug to ensure it sat tightly. Before anyone could process what happened, Mason stepped toward the second cadet and grabbed her pack as well. His muscles flexed but showed no sign of strain. He lifted the pack onto her back with the same fluid ease, guiding the straps into place while she stood frozen in disbelief. A murmur spread across the squad, rippling in quiet waves. Craval's expression shifted from irritation to mild astonishment. He wasn't prepared for the sight of a human lifting Dominion standard gear like a routine gym workout. But he wouldn't show surprise, not yet. Instead, he barked, "Human, your pack still awaits, unless you plan to let someone else carry that too?" Mason turned toward the crate and let out a light laugh. Right, I'm getting to it." He reached his own pack, gripped the handles, and swung it up effortlessly. His posture didn't buckle, his breathing didn't change, and he didn't even pause to adjust his footing. The squad watched in full silence as the human settled the heavy pack across his shoulders, tightening the straps with practiced familiarity. Craval narrowed his eyes. "Stronger than you look," he muttered, too low for most to hear, but Mason caught the comment and gave a small shrug. "People say that sometimes," he said lightly. "Must be the Earth gravity or my mom's cooking." The aliens around him remained speechless. Their training had ingrained the understanding that humans were physically inferior in most measurable biological categories. Yet here stood a human cadet, lifting equipment meant for species twice his size. Even more astonishing was the absence of tension on his face. He looked as if he were merely warming up. As the squad prepared to move, another cadet approached the crate and attempted to lift her pack. Her footing slipped on the wet ground, and the weight toppled sideways, almost crashing onto her leg. Mason reacted instantly. He stepped forward, caught the falling pack mid-air, and stopped it from slamming into the ground. His boots dug into the soil, but he didn't stagger. Instead, he steadied the pack and rested it against his thigh. "You okay?" he asked. Yes, I'm fine," she answered, still stunned. "Want me to carry this one too?" Mason offered with a casual tone that made several soldiers snap their heads upward in shock. The cadet blinked. "Carry? Mine? But you already have your own." "Yeah," Mason said, "and 2 more won't hurt." A wave of murmurs erupted. Craval whipped around sharply. "Human," he growled, "do not take on tasks that are not yours. Every cadet carries his or her own load." Mason looked at the captain and answered sincerely, "I get that, but if someone needs help, I don't mind stepping in." Then he hefted the cadet's pack onto his shoulder as easily as if it weighed nothing more than a bag of soil. The squad stared. It was unreal. The human now carried 2 full packs, each nearly half his weight. Craval opened his mouth to reprimand him again, but another struggling cadet nearby caught Mason's attention. Without hesitation, Mason walked over and lifted the 3rd pack. His face remained calm, his posture stable. He settled the pack across his opposite shoulder and tightened the straps so it wouldn't slip. 3 packs, 1 human. Craval watched in utter confusion. Something inside him bristled with indignation. Yet another part of him, one he refused to acknowledge, felt a faint flicker of respect forming at the edges of his certainty. But the moment changed again when Mason looked around, saw no more cadets struggling, and laughed softly. "All right then," he said, adjusting the mountain of gear on his back. "Ready when you are, Captain." Craval stepped forward slowly, his boots pressing deep ridges into the moss-covered ground. He stopped directly in front of Mason, staring into his steady brown eyes. "You intend to march through Veraxis jungle," he said in a low, disbelieving tone, "carrying gear assigned to 3 soldiers?" "Sure," Mason replied with a confident nod. "I can carry more if you need." The captain clenched his jaw, fighting the urge to snap back. He studied the human closely, almost searching for the moment when the strain would finally reveal itself. But Mason merely gave him an encouraging smile, as if challenging him to say no. Craval finally said, "Move out." The squad started marching, armor clanking and packs swaying. And at the center of the line, walking with a relaxed stride, carrying the load of an entire half unit on his shoulders, was one human who didn't even look winded. The heat of Veraxis 5 landed on the squad like a heavy, damp cloak that refused to be shaken off. The jungle around them pulsed with an overwhelming presence, filled with layers of tangled vines, colossal trees with silver-veined bark, and glowing insects darting in unpredictable spirals. The air was thick enough to taste, saturated with moisture and the sharp tang of plant oils released by the brushing of leaves. Every sound echoed: the rustle of armor plates, the clicking of weapon sensors, the thump of boots against the spongy ground. The squad moved in a tight formation, adjusting to the weight on their backs and the slow, claustrophobic squeeze of the environment. Mason walked at the center of the column, carrying 3 full survival packs with surprising ease. The straps cut into his shoulders, but he didn't complain or slow down. His breathing remained steady, his steps measured and confident. Every so often he shifted one of the packs higher on his shoulder, but each adjustment looked effortless, like a habitual movement rather than a necessity. His expression stayed bright and strangely unconcerned, as if he were strolling through a peaceful forest instead of navigating one of the most dangerous jungles in Dominion-controlled territory. Behind him, several aliens struggled to maintain their pace. The ground rose sharply, forming uneven steps carved by roots as wide as tree trunks. Every few meters, the squad encountered thick mats of moss that clung stubbornly to their boots, pulling back with wet resistance. Even seasoned soldiers felt the jungle's pressure wearing down their stamina. Within 20 minutes, the squad's breathing grew heavy, and several cadets began to drag their feet. Mason's voice broke through the tension, light and casual. "You know," he said, stepping over a fallen branch, "back home, my grandpa used to take me hiking every Saturday. He always picked the steepest trails. He'd say, 'If you're not sweating by the time you reach the first hill, you're doing it wrong.' I guess that's why this feels kind of familiar, except with bigger trees. And more screaming insects." A few aliens flinched at the sudden chatter, unprepared for someone speaking so cheerfully under such strain. One cadet cast a confused glance at Mason, as if waiting for him to show signs of exhaustion. Another wiped perspiration from his eyes, muttering something frustrated under his breath. Mason didn't notice. He continued walking and talking, his tone unreasonably upbeat for someone hauling enough equipment to crush a standard training recruit. The deeper the squad ventured, the more oppressive the jungle became. Strange spores drifted through the humid air, glowing faintly before dissolving near the ground. Massive leaves slapped against armor plates as cadets pushed through the dense vegetation. Each alien carried a single pack, yet many staggered under the weight combined with the unforgiving climate. The squad's limbs glistened with condensed moisture as their bodies attempted to regulate temperature. Even Craval, with his imposing physiology and years of training, felt the jungle's grip tightening with every step. Mason pushed aside a curtain of vines, humming a tune to himself. He seemed oblivious to the discomfort that consumed everyone else. Occasionally, he turned his head to share another harmless comment or anecdote. "These trees remind me of the redwoods," he said, glancing up at a trunk that towered endlessly above the canopy. "Except redwoods don't have those weird glowing sacs, or those teeth-looking things near the base. Does that mean the tree is carnivorous? Because if so, I think I saw a documentary about something like that once. The narrator had an amazing voice, very dramatic." A cadet walking behind him stumbled slightly, more from disbelief than exhaustion. Craval, several steps ahead, stiffened visibly. He could hear Mason's voice traveling through the thick air like an echo that refused to die. The human's words weren't loud, but they were constant, steady, rhythmic, impossible to ignore. Every time Craval assumed the man would stop to catch his breath, Mason kept going, speaking as if storytelling were part of his breathing pattern. "Captain," a cadet whispered to Craval, trying to sound discreet. "How does he keep talking like that?" Craval didn't answer. He didn't have an answer. The path became steeper, turning into a slope covered in roots that twisted like coiled serpents. The squad struggled to climb. Some cadets grunted as they pulled themselves upward using the bark. Others slipped on slick patches of moss and had to regain their footing. The heavy air clung to their lungs, making every breath draw resistance. A few soldiers paused to steady themselves. Mason, however, marched upward as if he had just grabbed an extra set of dumbbells at the gym. The 3 packs shifted with every step, but his balance remained unbroken. He leaned forward slightly, planting his feet with deliberate precision, navigating the incline with the confidence of someone who trusted his own legs more than the path. When the slope became even steeper, he simply adjusted the weight, pulling one strap tighter and shifting another pack higher on his back. As he climbed, he continued talking. "This incline's not bad. On Earth, we have this place called Pike's Peak. Took me almost all day to hike up. The air gets thin near the top. My cousin passed out halfway and rolled into a bush. He wasn't hurt, but he lost his lunch. Fun times. Anyway, this is easier. Jungle's not exactly thin air." A cadet gasped for breath, glaring up at him. "Why, are you still talking?" Mason turned his head just enough to flash a friendly smile. "It helps with pacing. Besides, it makes the climb feel shorter. Want to hear the story about the time my aunt tried to outrun a wild boar? It's hilarious." "No," the cadet wheezed. Mason chuckled. "Suit yourself. I'll save it for the campfire." Craval tightened his grip on the strap of his pack. He was already irritated before the mission started, but now something different simmered deep inside him. Confusion mixed with a slowly growing disbelief. He had expected the human to be the first to collapse. Instead, Mason seemed to grow more energetic the longer he walked. His voice carried through the jungle, cutting through every grumble and cough, steady and unfazed. Farther ahead, the terrain flattened for a brief moment, leading to a narrow passage where the trees scrunched together like interlocking pillars. The squad squeezed through the tight space, pushing leaves aside and ducking under twisted roots suspended from above. Mason held 2 branches apart so a cadet could pass. His muscles tightened under the strain of the packs, but he remained completely composed. "You know," Mason said softly, "this place is really beautiful. Alien worlds don't get enough appreciation when people are too stressed to look around. Look at those crystal flowers. They actually sparkle. I bet they'd make great decorations if they weren't probably toxic. A cadet glanced briefly, then snapped her head forward. Please, stop talking. Mason laughed again. Sure, for now. But he didn't stop for long. Within moments, another soft observation slipped from his lips about the colors of the leaves, the strange footprints near the roots, or the rhythmic pulse of the jungle insects. His words floated between the soldiers like drifting seeds, impossible to ignore, strange and oddly comforting. As the squad approached a set of fallen trees blocking the path, Mason stepped forward without being asked. He wedged one foot against the ground and lifted his leg to swing over the trunk. The packs shifted but remained secure. Once across, he turned and offered a hand to a cadet laboring behind him. He pulled her up with effortless strength, smiling warmly as she caught her breath. Craval watched silently from ahead, his mind churning. He could no longer deny what he saw. The human possessed an endurance that defied expectations. Mason's body moved with natural fluidity. His breathing never grew heavy, and his spirit remained annoyingly light. He continued talking well into the march, weaving stories that filled the air, stories that shouldn't have been possible for someone carrying triple the weight of the squad. Hours passed. The jungle deepened. The foliage thickened. The humidity soaked every inch of armor. Yet Mason kept walking, kept carrying, kept talking. By the time the squad reached a clearing where the canopy briefly parted, revealing shafts of pale green sunlight, several cadets leaned on their knees, exhausted. Craval stood still for a moment, staring ahead with narrowed eyes, refusing to show his own fatigue. Mason stepped into the clearing, exhaled slowly, and stretched his neck. Nice spot, he said. Anyone thirsty? I'd offer water, but I think it's in one of these packs. Somewhere under the other two. No one spoke. No one had the energy. And Craval realized something unsettling. For the first time since the mission began, the squad didn't look at Mason with mockery. They looked at him with stunned bewilderment and a growing hint of respect. The clearing offered only a momentary break before the jungle reclaimed its dominance. As soon as the squad resumed the march, the terrain shifted again, rising into a steep, jagged incline carved by centuries of shifting roots and eroding stone. The slope was nearly vertical in places, turning the path into a grueling climb rather than a simple hike. The air, heavy with moisture, clung to every breath, slowing even the strongest cadets. The oppressive heat pressed against the squad like a living weight, thickening with every meter of elevation. Craval led the way, but even his steps lacked their usual confidence. His powerful legs strained against the incline, and sweat beaded along the ridges of his dark blue skin, forming thin lines that traveled down the creases of his armor. He forced himself forward with disciplined determination, but the strain was evident. His breaths became heavier, louder, more forced. He refused to slow down, yet the jungle no longer responded to his strength the way it once did. Each step burned through more of his endurance. Behind him, the cadets grunted and gasped. The slope demanded constant focus. One misstep would send someone tumbling back into the tangled undergrowth. Even the most confident climbers began gripping the roots protruding from the earth for support. A few cadets paused to gather energy before continuing. The climb stretched endlessly upward, disappearing into a haze of green mist. Mason followed near the middle of the formation, still carrying the 3 heavy packs that dug into his shoulders with every movement. The incline forced him to lean forward, making the load shift against his back like a stack of unstable boulders. Yet he didn't falter. His boots sank into the moist soil, gripping firmly as he pushed upward. His breath remained steady, controlled, and almost unbelievable given the weight he supported. Halfway up the incline, Mason began talking again. Not loudly, but enough for those around him to hear. You know, this reminds me of a training course back home. Not exactly the same, since Earth doesn't have jungle slopes that try to eat your shoes, but the incline feels familiar. I had this instructor who loved hills. Said they built character. Honestly, I just think he liked watching us suffer. A cadet ahead of him wheezed, unable to respond. Mason adjusted one of the packs with a quick tug, redistributing the weight, and continued climbing. He stepped over cracked stones, pushed past scratching branches, and navigated the slope with methodical precision. Despite the difficulty, he remained engaged, pointing out interesting rock formations or unusual patches of glowing fungus. His tone carried a strange ease, even as the rest of the squad moved silently, using every ounce of strength to continue. Craval paused near a bend in the slope, pretending to study the path ahead. He placed one hand against a broad tree trunk, masking the fact that his legs trembled slightly from exhaustion. He inhaled deeply, trying to steady himself, but the air refused to offer relief. His stomach tightened with the uncomfortable realization that his body was reaching its limit sooner than expected. He glanced back over his shoulder, expecting to see several cadets collapsed or falling behind. Instead, he saw Mason climbing steadily, his expression focused but relaxed. The human's breathing remained stable, his posture solid. The triple packs didn't seem to crush him. Instead, they seemed to merge into his silhouette, becoming part of his movement rather than an obstacle. Craval's pride flared sharply. He gritted his teeth and pushed onward, refusing to let a human, any human, outlast him. But the jungle had no regard for pride. Every step drained more of his energy, and the slope only grew steeper. His foot slipped slightly on a patch of slick moss, and he lurched forward, barely catching himself before collapsing. A sharp bolt of pain shot up his leg, forcing him to plant his foot carefully. He kept marching, but his breathing soon turned into rasping exhales. His vision blurred at the edges, and the world around him pulsed with shifting colors as fatigue clawed at his senses. A few cadets noticed his slowing pace but were too drained to offer assistance. Each was locked in a personal battle with the unforgiving terrain. The squad had no room for helping others. Every soldier was on the verge of collapse. Except Mason. Mason noticed the captain's faltering steps from several meters below. His eyes narrowed with concern. He didn't say anything at first, watching closely to confirm what he suspected. When Craval stumbled a second time, nearly dropping to one knee, Mason increased his pace. The packs clattered slightly as he climbed faster, overtaking two cadets with a soft, "Sorry, just squeezing by." The incline didn't slow him. If anything, urgency fueled his steps. He reached Craval just as the captain's foot slid again. "Captain, hold on," Mason said, his voice firm but not condescending. Craval shot him a sharp glare, but the glare lacked strength. "Do not touch me," he hissed, attempting to straighten himself. His leg buckled again. Mason moved anyway. He reached out and gripped the strap of the captain's pack. With a single shift of his body, he hauled the heavy pack off Craval's shoulders and onto his own overloaded back. The added weight slammed against him like a collapsing wall, but Mason adjusted quickly, redistributing the packs with a practiced tilt. His legs shook for a moment under the sudden increase, but he locked his core, steadied his stance, and exhaled. Craval stared at him in disbelief. "Human, you cannot carry all of that." Mason flashed a determined grin. "Sure I can. I've carried worse. Well, maybe not this much at once, but there's a first time for everything." Craval attempted to protest, but Mason interrupted with a light, nearly cheerful tone. "Just focus on climbing, sir. I've got your gear. Besides, this incline's easier if you don't think about it. Helps to talk, actually. Did you ever hear the story about my cousin who tried hiking in sandals? Worst idea he ever had. Mason," Craval growled, his voice strained. "Stop talking." Mason chuckled. "Talking helps me pace, and maybe it'll distract you from the slope." The cadets around them stared in stunned silence. Mason now carried 4 full packs, enough weight to incapacitate even an experienced Dominion soldier. Yet he didn't just continue marching. He kept talking while doing it. His voice rose and fell in soft rhythm, cutting through the oppressive heat like a steady drum. Craval struggled to keep moving, the absence of the heavy pack giving him only slight relief. His body trembled from exhaustion, but he forced his legs to obey. Mason remained directly beside him, ready to catch him if he fell again. The two climbed together step by step. The incline tried to pull them down, the heat tried to suffocate them, and the thick air tried to sap every drop of energy from their muscles. But Mason's presence, bright, steady, unshakable, gave the squad an unexpected anchor. Cadets who had been moments from collapsing now lifted their heads. A spark of renewed strength pulsed through them. Seeing Mason do the impossible lit something in their chests, something that pushed them forward even as their bodies screamed. By the time the squad reached the ridge at the top of the incline, several cadets collapsed onto the ground, gasping for air. Craval leaned heavily against a tree trunk, his legs barely supporting him. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. Mason lowered the four packs slowly, one by one, careful not to let them slam into the soil. He stretched his shoulders, rolled his neck, and exhaled deeply with a hint of amusement. "Great climb," he said, wiping sweat from his forehead. "Next time, we should race." Craval stared at him, too drained to reply. His pride burned, but beneath the burn was something unexpected, an emotion he hadn't felt in years. Respect. The ridge leveled out into a narrow plateau of cracked stone and tangled roots. The jungle canopy thinned above, allowing sheets of pale green sunlight to pierce through the branches like the rays of a filtered dawn. The squad dragged themselves across the plateau with heavy, uneven footsteps. Every cadet breathed in ragged bursts, shoulders slumped under a fatigue that clung to them as forcefully as the humidity itself. Even Craval, who usually walked with unshakable posture, moved with a stiffness that betrayed how close he had come to collapse. Mason, however, still carried himself with surprising steadiness. His movements held a certain looseness that suggested deep exhaustion beneath his skin, yet his spirit refused to waver. His steps remained balanced. His breathing, though heavier than before, stayed controlled. The four survival packs he had carried up the last stretch now rested on the ground behind him, lined up neatly near the tree line. He had lowered them once the squad reached stable footing, handling them with the same casual care that he had shown throughout the march. Craval leaned against a massive thorn-lined trunk to steady his trembling legs. His chest rose and fell with slow, deliberate breaths as he fought to compose himself. His deep blue skin was slick with sweat, his armor plates streaked with dirt and crushed foliage. For a long moment, he said nothing. He simply watched the human through narrowed, thoughtful eyes, unable to reconcile the sight before him with everything he believed. The cadets collapsed in clusters across the plateau. Some drank small sips from their hydration tubes. Others stretched out on flat stones to cool their skin. A few cast occasional glances toward Mason, each look a mixture of disbelief and admiration. None spoke. Talking required strength they no longer possessed. Mason stretched his arms overhead, winced slightly as his shoulders cracked, and exhaled with a tired laugh. "That climb was brutal," he said. "I'm definitely feeling it now. Whoever designed this training route has a sense of humor." A cadet lifted her head weakly and muttered, "How do you still have energy to talk?" Mason smiled, leaning forward to loosen one of the straps that had chafed his shoulder. "Talking helps me breathe, and it helps distract from the burn. Besides," he glanced around at the exhausted squad, his voice softening, "someone has to keep the mood up." The cadet lowered her head again, shaking it with a faint, exhausted grin. Craval pushed himself off the tree trunk and walked toward Mason with a slow, deliberate stride. The weight of his authority returned in each step, but something else lingered behind it. A hesitation, almost invisible, but present. He stopped in front of the human, studying him as if trying to understand a creature from a world he had never known. Mason straightened, sensing the captain's presence. He braced himself for another lecture, another warning, another thinly veiled insult. But the silence stretched longer than expected. Finally, Craval spoke, his voice lower and less abrasive than before, Human. Yes, Captain, Mason replied. Craval glanced at the row of packs resting neatly behind Mason. He scanned the human's exhausted but steady posture. His eyes narrowed not with hostility, but with something closer to contemplation. You carried the load of 4 soldiers, he said slowly. You climbed a slope that challenged every trained cadet in this unit. You spoke the entire time. Mason rubbed the back of his neck. Yeah. Sorry if it was annoying. I tend to talk more when I'm tired. Craval blinked once, taken aback by the simplicity of the answer. Annoying is not the word I would choose. His voice wavered slightly before regaining firmness. Unexpected. Unnatural. Impossible. Those are closer. Mason shrugged. Humans are weird sometimes. The corner of Craval's mouth twitched, an expression dangerously close to a smile, though he masked it immediately. I misjudged you, he said, his words heavy with a rare sincerity. Your strength is not what I expected. Mason nodded, his expression warm. Thanks. But honestly, I'm just doing my part. Craval's gaze sharpened. Do not diminish your accomplishment, human. His tone carried weight, enough to silence a nearby cadet who had tried to sit up. Few Dominion soldiers could do what you have done today. Fewer still could do it without complaint. Mason's smile widened slightly. I complained a little. Craval looked at him for a long, measured moment. Your manner of complaining does not count. Mason laughed, a genuine, relieved sound that drifted lightly across the plateau. The captain turned to the squad, raising his voice so it carried through the clearing. Cadets, look at the human. Look well. Some forced themselves to lift their heads. Others rolled onto their backs, listening. We trained to survive harsh worlds. We trained to carry weight. We trained to endure pain. Yet this human... He gestured toward Mason with a broad sweep of his arm. He carried more than any of you. He endured more. He marched with more spirit. And he did not falter. A few cadets exchanged stunned looks. One cadet nodded faintly, acknowledging the reality none of them could deny. Craval continued, his voice growing more resolute. Mock him again, and you mock strength itself. I will not tolerate such ignorance. Mason stiffened slightly. Praise, even firm, commanding praise, felt strange coming from someone who had insulted him only hours before. He shifted awkwardly, unsure how to respond. The captain stepped closer and lowered his voice so only Mason could hear. I once believed humans relied on technology and numbers to make up for weakness. His eyes softened, just barely. I was wrong. Mason swallowed, surprised by how serious the moment felt. We just push through stuff, he said quietly. Sometimes that's all we have. Craval nodded once, a gesture filled with solemn respect. You earned your place in this squad today, not by force, by endurance. Before Mason could answer, one cadet from the edge of the plateau spoke weakly. Human, can you teach us that pacing trick? The one you use when you talk and walk? Mason blinked, slightly embarrassed. Sure. It's not really a trick. It's just breathing in rhythm while you... Craval raised a hand, silencing him. You will teach it, he declared, after the squad rests. His gaze softened even further. And after you rest. Mason laughed again, rubbing a hand over his forehead. I guess I could use a break now. The jungle wind shifted, carrying cooler air across the plateau. The cadets settled into temporary rest positions, relieved to have a captain who finally allowed them to stop. Mason sank onto a flat stone, stretching his aching arms while the packs waited patiently behind him. His muscles throbbed with exhaustion, but the ache felt good, earned. He glanced at the squad. For the first time, no one looked at him with mockery. No one sneered at his smaller frame. No one doubted his abilities. Instead, each pair of eyes that met his held something real: respect, gratitude, and a quiet understanding that this human was no outsider anymore. Craval walked toward the edge of the plateau, scanning the jungle below. For a moment he stood still, letting the wind move through the ridges of his armor. Then he spoke without turning around. "Mason Ward, when this mission ends, I will speak to command regarding your placement." Mason looked up. "Placement? You will not be temporary," Craval said. "This squad needs a soldier with your spirit." Mason felt a slow warmth spread through his chest. "I'd like that." Craval nodded once, finally acknowledging what he had resisted since the beginning. The human had earned his place, not through size, not through armor, not through any advantage, through heart, through endurance, through relentless, steady, unstoppable will. As the suns dipped behind the distant canopy and the sky turned a muted green, the squad rested side by side. For the first time, Mason truly belonged among them, and no one, not even the captain, would dare mock human muscles again.